Jake had always been the guy who rolled his eyes at alien movies. Working at the Space Research Center for 3 years, he'd heard every crazy story you could imagine. People calling about lights in the sky, strange sounds, weird dreams about little green visitors. He'd politely listen, write it down, and file it away with all the other reports that led nowhere. That Tuesday night in August changed everything. Jake was pulling another late shift at the observatory. His job was simple: monitor the radio signals. Coming from deep space, looking for patterns that might indicate intelligent life. Most nights it was just background noise from distant stars and galaxies, the kind of sounds that would put you to sleep if you weren't careful. Around midnight, something different caught his attention. The usual static and hums were there, but underneath it all was something else. A pattern. Not random like everything else they picked up, but organized, like someone tapping out a rhythm. At first, Jake thought it might be interference from a satellite or maybe some equipment acting up. He ran through all the standard checks, adjusting frequencies and cleaning up the signal. But the pattern remained. If anything, it got clearer. What made his hands shake was when he realized the pattern matched his heartbeat. Exactly. Jake sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. This had to be a coincidence. Radio waves from space don't sync up with someone's pulse. That's not how physics works. He tried to calm himself down, slow his breathing, get his heart rate under control. The pattern slowed down, too. Now he was really freaking out. Jake stood up, walked around the room, came back to his desk. The signal was still there, still matching whatever his heart was doing. When he got excited, it sped up. When he tried to relax, it slowed down. This was impossible. But it was happening. Jake decided to test something crazy. He started thinking about numbers. Simple math problems. 2 + 2 = 4. The signal seemed to pulse 4 times. He thought about his age. 28. 28 pulses came through the speakers. His mouth went dry. Either he was losing his mind or something out there was reading his thoughts. For the next hour, Jake ran every test he could think of. He thought about colors. And somehow the signal seemed to change, in ways that felt like different colors. He pictured shapes, and the radio waves seemed to shift into patterns that reminded him of those shapes. The scariest part wasn't that it was happening. The scariest part was that it felt natural, like having a conversation with someone who spoke a different language, but you could still understand each other perfectly. Around 2 in the morning, Jake got brave enough to try something really wild. Instead of thinking about numbers or colors, he focused on a simple idea. "Hello?" The response was immediate. The signal changed completely, becoming something that felt warm and welcoming. Not threatening or scary, but like someone waving back at you from across a crowded room. Jake's hands were shaking as he thought his next message. "Who are you?" What came back through the radio waves wasn't words or sounds he could understand with his ears, but somehow his mind translated it perfectly. The message was clear. "A friend who has been waiting a very long time to talk to you." That's when Jake realized his life would never be the same again. He spent the rest of the night in what felt like the strangest conversation of his life. Not talking with his voice, not typing on a keyboard, but thinking thoughts and having them answered by someone or something impossibly far away. The being on the other end seemed just as amazed as Jake was. Through their odd mental connection, Jake learned that his new friend had been monitoring Earth's radio signals for years, hoping to find someone who could make this kind of contact. Most humans, apparently, had the ability somewhere deep in their minds, but it was like a muscle that nobody knew how to use. Jake was different. Maybe it was all those years working around radio equipment, or maybe he was just lucky. But somehow, his brain had figured out how to tune into frequencies that most people couldn't even imagine. By the time the sun started coming up, Jake had learned a few basic things about his mysterious new friend. She was definitely not from Earth. Her people lived somewhere so far away that even light would take years to travel between their worlds. She'd been traveling through space when something went wrong with her ship, leaving her stranded somewhere beyond where any Earth telescope could see. But the most amazing thing was that she could hear his thoughts almost as clearly as if he was talking out loud. And somehow, even though they'd never met, even though she wasn't even human, Jake felt like he'd found someone who understood him better than anyone ever had. When his shift ended and the morning crew arrived, Jake didn't know how to explain what had happened. How do you tell your boss that you spent the night having a conversation with an alien using only your thoughts? How do you write that up in a report without sounding completely crazy? So he didn't tell anyone. At least, not yet. He needed time to figure out what this all meant. But as he drove home that morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant colors, Jake couldn't stop thinking about his new friend floating somewhere in the darkness of space. And every time he thought about her, he could swear he felt something like a gentle whisper in the back of his mind, as if she was thinking about him too. The next few days were the strangest of Jake's life. He found himself rushing to work every night, eager to continue his impossible conversations with the being he'd started calling Echo. The name just felt right. She seemed to bounce his thoughts back to him, but with her own unique spin on everything. Getting to know someone through pure thought was nothing like normal conversation. There were no words to get in the way, no misunderstandings about tone or meaning. When Echo shared something with him, Jake felt it directly in his mind, like experiencing her memories firsthand. That's how he learned her real story. Echo wasn't just lost in space. She was completely stranded. Her ship had been damaged by something she called a void storm, which Jake's mind translated as some kind of cosmic event that could tear apart anything in its path. She'd managed to save herself, but her ship's engines were dead, and she was drifting in the empty space between solar systems. The really wild part was finding out that Echo's people had been watching Earth for decades. Not in a scary invasion planning way, but more like scientists studying an interesting discovery. They'd noticed that humans had something special, the same kind of mental abilities that Echo's species used to communicate across their entire civilization. The problem was that most humans had no idea this ability existed. It was like having a radio in your head that was turned off, or having a muscle you never learned how to use. Echo explained that her people had tried to make contact before, but they could never find humans who could hear them clearly enough for real communication. Jake was different, though he still didn't understand why. Maybe it was all those years working with radio equipment that had somehow tuned his brain to the right frequency. Or maybe he was just one of the lucky few who happened to be born with the right kind of mind. Either way, he was probably the first human in history to have a real conversation with someone from another world. Learning to communicate better took practice. At first, their exchanges were simple, basic ideas, feelings, images. But as the nights went by, Jake found he could share more complex thoughts. He showed Echo what Earth looked like through his memories: blue oceans, green forests, white clouds swirling around the planet. She was amazed by how alive his world was compared to the cold emptiness of space she was floating in. Echo shared her own memories, too. Jake experienced what it was like to live on her home world, where cities floated in the sky and her people could talk to each other across entire continents using only their minds. Her planet had 2 suns that painted the sky in colors Jake had never seen, and oceans that sparkled like liquid diamonds. But the most incredible thing Echo taught him was about the mental connection itself. She explained that when 2 minds linked the way theirs had, it created something her people called a thought bridge. The more they used it, the stronger it became. And the stronger it became, the more they could share with each other. Jake started noticing changes in himself. His dreams became more vivid, filled with places and experiences that definitely weren't from his own life. Sometimes he'd wake up knowing things he'd never learned, understanding concepts that should have been completely foreign to him. It was like Echo's knowledge was slowly becoming part of his own mind. The emotional connection was even stronger than the mental one. When Echo felt lonely drifting in the darkness of space, Jake felt that loneliness too. When he had a good day, at work, or enjoyed a beautiful sunset, Echo experienced that joy right along with him. They were becoming linked in ways that went far deeper than just sharing thoughts. This created a problem Jake hadn't expected. He found himself thinking about Echo constantly, not just during their nighttime conversations, but throughout his entire day. While eating breakfast, he'd wonder what kind of food her people enjoyed. Walking outside, he'd imagine how she would see Earth's landscape. Even doing simple things like listening to music made him wish he could share those experiences with her. The strange part was that Echo seemed to be going through the same thing. She told him that his thoughts kept interrupting her during what should have been her rest periods. His memories of Earth kept playing in her mind like movies she couldn't turn off. She was becoming as fascinated with his world as he was with hers. Their conversations grew longer each night. Jake would arrive at work planning to have a quick mental chat before getting on with his regular duties, but hours would pass without him realizing it. They'd explore each other's memories, share stories about their different worlds, and try to understand what their connection really meant. Echo's people had legends about bonds like theirs, she told him. Stories of minds that linked so completely. That distance became meaningless. But those were just stories from the old days, back when her civilization was younger and more wild. Modern members of her species were taught to keep their mental connections controlled and limited. What was happening between Jake and Echo was anything but controlled. Their bond was growing stronger every night, and neither of them seemed to want to stop it. Jake had never felt so understood by anyone in his life. Echo had never experienced the kind of warmth and curiosity that seemed to flow naturally from Jake's mind. But as their connection deepened, both of them began to sense that something big was coming. Something that would test their impossible friendship in ways neither of them was prepared for. 2 weeks into their nightly conversations, Jake discovered something that changed everything. He was sitting in his apartment eating lunch and thinking about Echo, when suddenly he felt something strange through their mental connection. It was like an echo of surprise, a sharp intake of breath that wasn't his own. That night at work, Jake asked Echo about it. "Did something happen to you earlier today? Around noon?" Echo's response came with a feeling of embarrassment mixed with confusion. "You felt that?" "I was." "How do you say it?" "Startled." "Your thoughts?" "Came so suddenly and strongly that my body reacted without my control." Jake didn't understand at first. What kind of reaction? Through their mental link, Echo shared the sensation with him. It felt exactly like the moment when someone surprises you and you gasp, that involuntary catch of breath that happens before you can stop it. But for Echo, it happened every time Jake's mind wandered to her during the day. "Wait," Jake said, his own thoughts racing. "This happens every time I think about you?" "Yes," Echo replied, and Jake could sense her puzzlement. "Among my people. This kind of physical response only happens when two minds form what we call a deep bond, but it usually takes many cycles of our planet's rotation to develop. We have only been connected for a short time." Jake's heart started beating faster as he realized what this meant. "How often does this happen to you?" There was a pause before Echo answered. "Very often. Your thoughts of me come many times each day, sometimes so frequently that I must focus on controlling my breathing." The truth hit Jake like a lightning bolt. He thought about Echo constantly, not just during their conversations, but throughout his entire day. When he woke up in the morning, she was his first thought. When he saw something interesting, he immediately wanted to share it with her. When he went to sleep, she was the last thing on his mind. He'd been so caught up in the wonder of their Connection that he hadn't realized how completely she'd taken over his thoughts. And apparently, every single time his mind drifted to her, Echo experienced that gasping reaction. "I'm so sorry," Jake thought to her. "I didn't know I was causing that. I'll try to think about you less." But even as he made that promise, Jake knew it was impossible. Echo had become part of his daily life in a way that felt as natural as breathing. Asking him not to think about her was like asking him not to think about his own heartbeat. Echo seemed to understand his dilemma. "Do not apologize. The sensation is not unpleasant. It is just unexpected. My people have teachings about bonds like ours, but I never thought I would experience one myself." Over the next few days, Jake became hyper-aware of his own thoughts. Every time his mind wandered to Echo, which was still, dozens of times a day. He imagined her somewhere in the darkness of space, suddenly gasping as his thoughts reached her across the impossible distance. The strangest part was that he could sometimes feel her reaction through their connection. A little flutter of surprise, a moment of disrupted breathing, and then what felt like a smile in his mind as she realized it was him thinking of her again. Jake tried everything he could think of to control his wandering thoughts. He threw himself into work projects, went for long walks, even tried meditation. Nothing worked. Echo had become so woven into his daily experience that trying not to think about her was like trying not to notice his own shadow. During one of their nightly conversations, Echo shared something that made Jake's situation even more complicated. "The gasping has become stronger," she told him, "and more frequent. I believe our bond is deepening beyond what either of us expected." Jake could feel the truth of this in his own experience. Their mental connection had grown so strong that he sometimes knew what Echo was thinking before she shared it with him. Her emotions had started blending with his own. When she felt peaceful, during her rest periods, Jake found himself unusually calm. When she felt lonely in the emptiness of space, Jake felt that loneliness too. "Is this normal for your people?" Jake asked. "No," Echo replied, and her answer came with feelings of wonder and slight fear. "Bonds this deep are rare, even among those who have known each other for many cycles. They happen only between minds that are perfectly matched, completely compatible. But such bonds come with risks." "What kind of risks?" Echo's explanation sent chills through Jake's mind. Among her people, individuals with such deep mental connections could become so intertwined that separating them became dangerous. Their thoughts, emotions, and even their life energy could become so linked that losing one would severely damage the other. "But surely that only happens after years of connection," Jake said, trying to convince himself as much as Echo. "Usually, yes. But our bond formed unusually quickly and strongly. I can feel your thoughts even when you are not trying to communicate with me." "Can you feel mine?" Jake realized with a shock that he could. Throughout their conversation, he'd been aware of Echo's emotions, her reactions, even some of her stray thoughts. It was like having someone sitting right next to him, except she was floating in the void between star systems. The gasping phenomenon had become just one sign of how deeply connected they'd become. Jake thought about Echo every few minutes, and each time she experienced that involuntary reaction. But instead of finding it annoying or disruptive, she'd started to look forward to those little moments of connection throughout her long, lonely days. "Your thoughts of me have become like a heartbeat," Echo told him. "Regular, constant, reassuring. They remind me that I am not alone in this emptiness." Jake felt his own heart skip a beat at her words. What had started as an amazing scientific discovery had become something much more personal and complicated. He was falling for someone he'd never seen, someone who might not even be human, someone who was so far away that light itself would take years to travel between them. And every time he thought about her, which was almost constantly, she gasped, a physical reminder of the impossible bond growing stronger between them with each passing day. 3 weeks after their first contact, Echo shared news that made Jake's world stop spinning. "My people are coming," she told him during one of their nightly conversations. The thought came wrapped in emotions so complex that Jake couldn't separate them all. Relief, joy, fear, and something that felt like heartbreak. Jake's mind went blank for a moment. "Coming? Here?" "Not to your world," Echo explained. "They have located my position and are sending a rescue vessel. The journey will take some time, but they will reach me before the cold season begins on your planet." Jake should have been happy. For her. Echo had been stranded alone in the darkness of space for who knows how long before they'd made contact. Being rescued by her own people was the best possible outcome. So why did he feel like someone had just punched him in the stomach? "That's wonderful news," he managed to think back to her, trying to hide his own turmoil. But hiding emotions from Echo had become impossible. Their bond was too deep now. She felt his pain as clearly as if it were her own. "You are not happy about this," she observed gently. Jake couldn't lie to her, even if he'd wanted to. "I should be happy. I know I should be. You'll be safe, back with your own kind. It's what you need." But I don't want to lose you." The admission hung between them through their mental connection. Jake had been trying not to think about what their relationship really meant, but now he couldn't avoid it anymore. Somewhere along the way, he'd fallen completely for this being he'd never seen, never touched, never even heard speak with an actual voice. Echo's response came loaded with the same conflicted emotions Jake was feeling. "I do not wish to lose. You either. But there is something else you must know about the rescue." Jake braced himself for more bad news. "The vessel that comes for me will take me far from this region of space. My people are nomadic. We do not stay in one place for long. Periods. Once I leave with them, I will be too distant for our mental connection to reach across the void." The words hit Jake like ice water. Not only would Echo be leaving, but their bond, this incredible connection that had become the most important part of his life, would be severed completely. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Perhaps 2 of your months, maybe less." "The rescue. Ship travels faster than most vessels. 2 months." Jake tried to process what that meant. 2 months to say goodbye to the most meaningful relationship he'd ever had. 2 months before Echo disappeared from his life forever. But as the days passed, Jake learned there was an even bigger problem. Echo explained that their mental bond had grown so strong that breaking it suddenly could be dangerous for both of them. "Among my people, when 2 minds become as connected as ours have, separation must be gradual," she told him, "like slowly dimming a light rather than switching it off suddenly. If the bond is severed too quickly, both individuals can experience what you might call mental shock." "What kind of shock?" Echo's explanation terrified Jake. The symptoms could include severe confusion, loss of memory, difficulty forming new relationships, and a persistent feeling of emptiness that could last for years. In the worst cases, individuals never fully recovered from having such a deep mental bond torn away. "But there might be another way," Echo said, though her thoughts came with uncertainty. She explained that her people had ancient techniques for maintaining mental connections across vast distances. They required special equipment and tremendous mental discipline, but it was theoretically possible to keep their bond alive even if she traveled to the far reaches of the galaxy. The problem was that these techniques had never been tested between different species. Echo's people had only used them to maintain connections with other members of their own kind. There was no way to know if Jake's human mind could handle the strain of such a long-distance mental link. "It could work," Echo said, "but it could also damage your mind permanently. The risk is too great." Jake found himself facing an impossible choice. He could let Echo go peacefully, accepting the mental trauma that would come from severing their bond. Or he could risk everything on an untested technique that might allow them to stay connected, but could also destroy his mind in the process. The worst part was that Echo was facing the same terrible decision. She could return safely to her people and gradually heal from losing their connection, or she could risk her own mental health trying to maintain a bond with someone from a completely different species. As the days passed and the rescue ship drew closer, both Jake and Echo found themselves struggling with emotions neither had expected. Jake realized he'd rather risk losing his mind than lose Echo completely. And Echo discovered that the thought of never feeling Jake's presence in her thoughts again was more frightening than any danger she might face. Their nightly conversations became more intense, more desperate. They shared every memory, every thought, every feeling they could, as if trying to store up enough of each other to last a lifetime. Jake memorized the way Echo's mind felt when she was happy, sad, curious, or peaceful. Echo absorbed every detail of Jake's memories of Earth, his childhood, his dreams for the future. But underneath all their sharing was the knowledge that time was running out. Every night brought the rescue ship closer. Every conversation might be their last. "What do we do?" Jake asked during one of their final weeks together. "I do not know," Echo replied, and for the first time since they'd met, she sounded truly lost. "In all the stories my people tell about deep bonds, there are no tales of choices like this. No guidance for loves that cross the boundaries between worlds." Jake lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of his apartment, feeling Echo's presence in his mind like a warm light in the darkness. Soon, that light might be extinguished forever. Or worse, trying to keep it burning might destroy them. Both. The rescue ship was only days away, and they were running out of time to make an impossible choice. The rescue ship arrived on a Thursday night in October. Jake felt Echo's excitement and terror through their connection as she detected her people's vessel approaching through the darkness of space. "They are here," she told him, her mental voice filled with emotions Jake couldn't untangle. Jake was at his workstation, surrounded by all the radio equipment that had first brought them together. His hands were shaking as he realized this might be their last conversation. They still hadn't decided what to do about maintaining their connection across the impossible distances Echo would travel. "Are you ready?" Jake asked, though he knew neither of them was ready for this moment. "No," Echo replied honestly. "I have dreamed of rescue for so long. But now that it is here, all I can think about is losing you." Over the past week, they had researched every possible way to maintain their bond. Echo had shared the ancient techniques her people used for long-distance mental connections. Jake had worked with the radio equipment at his lab, trying to find ways to amplify their telepathic link using Earth's most powerful transmitters. The plan they'd developed was desperate and dangerous. They would use Jake's radio telescope array combined with Echo's more advanced technology to create a kind of mental beacon. If it worked, their thoughts could follow this beacon across any distance. If it failed, the mental strain could damage both their minds permanently. "We don't have to do this," Jake told her as he prepared the equipment. "You can go with your people. We both know you'll be safer that way." "And spend the rest of my existence wondering what might have been?" Echo's response came with fierce determination. "Jake, in all my cycles of life, I have never felt as complete as I do when our minds are connected. I would rather risk everything than lose that forever." Jake felt tears running down his face as he made the final adjustments to his equipment. "I feel the same way. You've become part of who I am. I don't know how to be myself without you in my thoughts." As Echo's rescue ship docked with her damaged vessel, they began the most dangerous experiment either of them had ever attempted. Echo guided Jake through the mental techniques her people used to strengthen telepathic bonds. At the same time, Jake channeled their connection through every piece of radio equipment he could access. The process was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. He felt his consciousness expanding, reaching out across space toward Echo. At the same time, he could sense her mind stretching toward his, their thoughts becoming a bridge across the cosmic void. Pain shot through Jake's head as his human brain struggled to handle the intensity of the connection. But underneath the pain was something incredible. He could feel Echo more clearly than ever before. Not just her thoughts and emotions, but her very essence, the core of who she was. "The ship is ready to depart," Echo told him, her mental voice strained from the effort of maintaining their amplified connection. "This is the moment of truth." Jake closed his eyes and focused every ounce of his mental energy on their bond. "I love you," he thought to her with all the strength he had. "And I love you," Echo replied. "Across all the stars, across all the emptiness, I will always love you." The rescue ship began to move, carrying Echo away from the region of space where Jake's radio signals were strongest. For a terrifying moment, Jake felt their connection start to fade. Panic flooded through him as Echo's presence in his mind began to dim. But then something amazing happened. The mental bridge they had built held. Instead of fading away, their connection stabilized at this new distance. Jake could still feel Echo's thoughts, still sense her emotions, still experience the warmth of her presence in his mind. "It's working," Jake whispered aloud, hardly believing it was true. "Yes," Echo replied, her mental voice clear and strong despite the growing distance between them. "I can feel you as clearly as ever." As days turned into weeks, Jake learned to live with his extraordinary long-distance relationship. Echo traveled with her people to distant parts of the galaxy, but their mental connection remained unbroken. She shared with him the wonders she saw, nebulae that painted space in colors beyond human imagination, ancient civilizations that built cities among the stars, phenomena that human science had never dreamed of. Jake shared his world with her in return. Through his eyes, she experienced Earth's changing seasons, watched sunrises and sunsets, felt rain and snow. She became fascinated with human music, experiencing symphonies and songs through Jake's memories and emotions. Their gasping phenomenon continued too. Every time Jake thought of Echo, which was still constantly, she experienced that little catch of breath, no matter how far apart they were. It became their private reminder that distance meant nothing to minds as connected as theirs. Jake's friends and family noticed changes in him, but he couldn't explain what had happened. "How do you tell people that you're in love with an alien who lives among the stars? How do you describe a relationship that exists purely in thought and emotion?" Instead, Jake found ways to hint at the truth. He told people he'd met someone very special, someone who lived far away but whom he talked to every day. When pressed for details, he'd just smile and say that some relationships transcend normal boundaries. The hardest part was the loneliness of having a love that no one else could understand. Jake would watch couples walking hand in hand and feel a pang of sadness that he would never hold Echo, never see her face, never hear her voice with his ears. But then Echo would sense his melancholy and flood his mind with warmth and love, reminding him that what they had was deeper than physical presence. Their connection was pure thought and emotion, unfiltered by the limitations of physical form. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked her one night as he lay in bed, feeling her presence like a gentle light in his mind. "Choosing this instead of a normal life with your own people?" "Never," Echo replied without hesitation. "My people live for thousands of your years, Jake. In all that time, most of us never experience a connection like ours. What we have is rarer than the rarest stars." Years passed. Jake aged and changed, but their bond remained constant. Echo traveled to corners of the universe Jake couldn't even imagine, but she was always there in his thoughts. When he achieved success at work, she celebrated with him. When he faced difficulties, she comforted him. When he felt lonely in a crowd of people, she reminded him that he was never truly alone. And always, every time his mind turned to her, which was still dozens of times each day, Echo would gasp softly somewhere among the stars, a physical reminder that love truly knows. No boundaries. Their story became proof that the most profound connections aren't always the ones you can see or touch. Sometimes the deepest love exists in the space between minds, in thoughts shared across impossible distances, in the simple truth that two souls can find each other even when separated by the vast emptiness of space. Jake learned to be happy with a love that existed beyond the normal rules of the universe. And Echo discovered that home isn't a place among the stars. It's wherever the mind you're connected to happens to be thinking of you.